Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 3, Learning Objective 3, where we continue to look at how infants and children develop. And in this learning objective, we'll look at cognitive development. So we're going to mainly concentrate on Piaget's theory of cognitive development. And cognitive development is all about how we acquire the ability to learn, think, communicate, and remember, among other things. But it's the development of our brain power, thinking and learning, remembering, communicating, decision making, problem solving, all those kind of things. And so Piaget was a major figure in this area of cognitive development. He really started this branch of psychology with years of research, kind of in the early to mid 1900s, and he was a Swiss psychologist, Jean Piaget, and he wanted to investigate how children's thinking changes as they develop. He originally observed his own children for long periods to watch their own development, and then he continued with other subjects. But he did years of work in this area, developing this major theory. He proposed that we change how we think as we form new schemas or ways of thinking about how the world works. So schemas are basically mental concepts. You store everything you know in schemas, and every action you know how to perform, every behavior, these are stored in schemas. So these are mental concepts, and let me give you some categories. I mean, we have mental concepts of things, what I call things, which includes objects, people, animals. So I have a schema of what a car is, for instance. If you tell me to ask me what a car is, right away I think of a vehicle with four wheels, and it's for transportation, and it has doors and the steering wheel, and I kind of have this concept I can bring to mind very quickly, and I don't picture any specific car. It's a concept of what a car is. And we have schemas of people, and in the case of when they involve people or groups of people, we also call those stereotypes. But those are just a type of schemas where we store information about people. I have schemas of animals. So if I think about my dog schema, I think about four legs, and it's furry, and it barks, and it may lick you, and it wags a tail, and it could bite you. Anyways, we also have, those are things. Right? We have these mental concepts of every kind of thing you know. We also have mental concepts of events. Events that you've repeated, you form kind of a general concept. So an example is, I have a going to a restaurant schema. And what I mean by that is that if I go to a brand new restaurant later today, I'm not going to walk into that restaurant saying, whoa, what is this place? Like, what? I have no idea where I'm going. Like, what's going to happen when I get in? I mean, I draw, if I know it's a restaurant, I draw on my restaurant scheme, and I know that when I go in, I'm going to get seated, and I'm going to be handed a menu, and they will ask if I want a drink, and they might bring me water or coffee or whatever, depending on the time of day. I'm going to order food. I'm going to eat it. I'm going to get a check, and I'm going to pay the bill and leave a tip, and and it's kind of it's a it's a general concept. I mean, there are some restaurants that'll be somewhat different, and you'll tend to remember them when they don't quite fit your general concept. So, I might go into one restaurant and say, whoa, they don't have menus here. The menu's on the wall, like it's a little bit different than what I'm used to. But it's there'll be minor differences. But overall, I use this schema so that I'm not totally, in the dark when I walk into a brand new restaurant. I know what's happening. Just like when you walk into a new classroom at school each term or each year. There's a procedure you expect. You go find a seat. No one has to tell you. And anyways, we also have mental concepts or schemas of actions. So this starts as a baby, and baby learns to grasp things, and that becomes a schema, so that they can purposely grasp an object and hold it in their hand. When they want to. They'll also develop a dropping schema. If they want to drop that object, they'll learn how. I mean, we're not born knowing how to do specific actions. A baby, what Piaget observed is he watched infants. He watched how they repeated actions in order to learn them, in order to form these schemas. So one day a baby accidentally drops something. It's kind of interesting, and next time they have something in the hand, they maybe purposely do it, and he would watch the babies repeat actions over and over. So a baby might pick up an object with their grasping schema, and then they would drop it from a certain height. Then they might pick it up and drop it from a different height, and so we have these actions. Later on you'll get more complex actions. Like I have a throwing schema. So if I want to throw a ball, I don't have to think about how to move my arm. I just think about where I want to throw it, and I activate my schema, and my arm just kind of moves. I'm not thinking of what kind of force to use or what angle my arm needs to be at. I just say I want to. I just think I want to throw over there, and the schema gets activated. So once again, we got things, we got events, we got actions. And the fourth category is ideas. We have schemas about ideas. They're not actually concrete things. So, like, I have a schema for what I believe democracy is. I have a schema for fairness, the concept of fairness, and the concept of justice, let's say. And so basically, like everything I know, whether it's things or or ideas, or in all the actions I performed, I form schemas of those, and all the events that I repeat during my life, I form schemas, and we rely on these schemas every day, to help us make sense of the world, so that when we do new things, we can rely on our schemas. I mean, I can drive to a new place along new roads. I'm not scared, and because my schema, a left turn at this new intersection I've never been to is the same as a left turn anywhere else. Basically. So we constantly are drawing on our schemas. So this is kind of I'm spending a little time here because the schemas are the backbone of Piaget's ideas. Is that we form these mental concepts, these schemas, and we form them, and we form new ones as we learn new things. We revise them as we learn that they're wrong, and we do this throughout our whole life. You're still doing it now. If you're learning anything new in this class, you're forming new schemas. Um, okay, the schemas are developed and refined using two processes. The first one is assimilation. This is the process we use to incorporate new information into existing frameworks for knowledge. So we're absorbing new experiences into our current knowledge structures. And if your knowledge structures are incomplete, like, this will cause errors, and we see errors all the time with children. I mean, so maybe there's a young child that has a cat at home, and they formed a cat schema. They've seen some cats in their life, and there's cats maybe in the storybooks, and they're outside one day at the park, and they see a skunk, and they've never seen a skunk before, so of course they're going to call it a cat. They assimilate this new experience. They kind of match this new animal with the closest match they have in their mind, and they would originally think it's a cat. And you see this at the zoo all the time. The first time young children go to the zoo, they'll look at a zebra and call it a horse, and they might see I don't know, they call off a lot of things dog. If they're really young, they'll call a lot of things dogs or cats because they only have some basic schema. So they might see a lion and call it a dog. Well, that's a big dog or something. Like, and they we so they're using the current knowledge structure to interpret the world, and that's what simulation is. And usually it's going to be, most of the time it's accurate, but if you don't have a full set of knowledge, you're always going to make mistakes, just like we do even at our age. I'll give you one more example. What do you think happens when very young child first comes across her mother's pills that were left on a table? Let's say, what do you think they're going to think they are? This child maybe has never taken a pill in their life if they're very young. They're going to reach for, in their mind, to their closest schema, and they're going to think they're candy because they're familiar with candy. And let's face it, pills and candies aren't that different looking. So this is what simulation is: using your current knowledge to make sense of the world. And but when you are wrong, I said, sometimes it leads to errors. We If we're wrong, we want to correct our current knowledge state. Like if we find out that we're wrong, so the mother comes rushing in and says, "No, that's not a pill. That's not a candy. That's a pill." And she explains the difference and how to tell the difference and how dangerous pills are. And so this child would then use accommodation, the process used to create new frameworks for knowledge or to drastically alter existing ones to incorporate new information that otherwise would not fit into their current knowledge structure. So they alter their current belief to make it more compatible with experience. So that child, would form a new schema. Oh, they've now learned the concept of pill. They would, probably refine their candy schema a little bit. Candies are more, I don't know, squishy and not as small and round, or pills are small and round and kind of shiny, or whatever. But this is, and so they've advanced their cognition, they've advanced their knowledge state, and this happens over and over and over, every day of your life. You're assimilating new things, you're accommodating when you need to. Here's an example from your textbook. So here's a young child. They've learned the concept of birds. They have a schema. Listen, they've already established a schema for birds, and their schema includes the details that birds have wings and birds fly. And probably not much else. They're not experts, but birds flying in the sky have been pointed out to them. So then they come across a butterfly, so they call it a bird. It's because it matches. Bird, it has wings and it flies. And then let's say this child is now corrected. No, that's not a bird. It's a different type of animal. It's called a butterfly. Um, and the mother adds that, one way they could tell difference is that birds have beaks. So this child undergoes accommodation now. They include new information in their bird schema. They add that birds have beaks, and they form a new schema, of, I don't know, flying animals, I guess, but or maybe specifically butterfly if they know the title or the name. And it has wings, it flies, but it doesn't have a beak. And and so once again, this is the accumulation of new knowledge, and their mind, and they've just advanced their cognition slightly. They have a little bit more knowledge, and it's a little bit more correct than it used to be. And they'll revise their bird schema, further as they learn more details about them, and they'll revise their flying animal scheme, or butterfly scheme as they get more information. Okay, Piaget's. I will point out a couple of these slides are out of order from what I put online, because I just switched the order for this presentation, so you might have to look around a couple of times. But they're the same slides. Okay, so Piaget's theory has 4 stages. So it's a stage theory. And he believes that you move from one stage to another, and you kind of leave well, let me put it this way. As you move from one stage to another, it is a shift in the way you think about things, your overall um, way that you look at the world and think about the world. So it's not you don't move from one stage to another just because you have more knowledge. He says that you think differently from one stage to another. And if you think about, like, let's say a 9-year old versus a 3-year old, I mean, it's hard to argue that they think differently. The 9-year old's going to have a lot more logic than the 3-year old, and um, the 3-year old's going to engage in different kinds of behaviors based on their thinking than the 9-year old. Like, so he said there are these four major stages. We're going to go through each of these, but this is a nice chart in your book. I'm not going to go through this actual chart, but you should, and try to learn each stage and keep them straight. It's on page 151. Okay. And I'll also point out each stage also has, cognitive limitations. You kind of define each stage by what they do and also what they can't do at each stage. So let's start with the sensory motor stage. And this is from birth to 2 years, first 2 years of life. Um, so it's the first stage. During the stage, infants acquire information about the world through their senses and their motor skills. So sensory motor, senses, motor skills. And the focus for an infant in this during these first 2 years is just on the here and now, like what they can presently see or hear or touch or taste, or smell, I guess, or and it's and their physical body and the movements of their body. Uh, in this stage, an infant's not thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow. That's beyond their current thinking abilities, and they're not even thinking about what they did the day before because they have a very limited memory system, and it's only this is why it's their focus is on the present and what's happening at the moment. Um, and they're learning once again. They're learning to about the world, just by any information that's coming in through their senses. Um, and they're refining their senses as they do this. Um, okay, and also they're learning, but how to use their bodies. Um, they have to practice. I mentioned action schemas. Uh, a baby will do something like kick their leg up and down in a crib, and they'll just repeat this action for a while. And what Piaget pointed out was that they're learning to use to how to move their leg when they want to. Like how to purposely lift it up and put it and go up and down and up and down. And you'll see them do things with their arms like that or their hands, and like because they're starting with like no coordination, and they have to learn just how to even move arms and legs and hands and feet and whatnot. And they're learning all this during this stage. One of their major accomplishments is known as object permanence, and object permanence refers to knowing an object still exists even when it's out of sight. Um, so even when you have no sense of it, you're not seeing it or hearing it or touching it. But so what Piaget pointed out is that when we come into this world and and because your focus, especially during the first year of life, is on the here and now. Like when your mother leaves the room, I mean, she doesn't exist anymore for you. It's so when people say things like babies are purposely crying to call their mother or whatnot, they don't even know the mother exists. During the first part of their life. Their only focus is on what's immediately in front of them, what they can touch and see and hear. Um, so object permanence is when they learn that even when they can't see something, that it still exists. And Piaget speculated that this occurs in the range of 8 to 12 months. So towards the end of the first year. There is a lot of newer evidence suggesting it occurs earlier, but and we'll stick with Piaget's idea for now. 8 to 12 months is what he said, and he would do a little test where there would be a baby and sitting in a high chair, and he would have a toy that they really want, and the baby would, it's something that makes a little noise, like I don't know, like a little rattle or something, and the baby would reach for it and reach for it, and he would put it down right in front of them, and they'd be reaching for it, and he would just cover it with a cloth quickly. So it's like their hands like are just inches away, like it's right there on the on their high chair table that comes that's in front of them, and so it's within touching range, but as soon as he covers it, they lose complete interest. They wanted that toy, and he just throws a cloth on top of it, and they all of a sudden just start looking around, and they stop reaching for it. And he thought, he showed that this demonstrated that this object, that no longer did they know that it was there or have a belief that it was there. They could not, they could no longer see it. And anyway, so that is known as object permanence. Like I said, your mother leaves a room. If you don't have object permanence, mother leaves a room and she no longer exists for you for a while until she comes back into the room. Okay, let's go on to the second stage. It's a pre-operational stage from 2 to 7 years of age. So, this includes, I might refer to this age category as preschoolers, even though it goes a little bit beyond preschool years, but it's mainly about preschoolers. In this stage, they start to think symbolically about objects, as it says here. And you see this because they will start engaging in make-believe play and thinking symbolically about objects. Is like they can now. The idea is that they can now they can think about things in their mind and picture an object even when it's not there now. And so when you see make-believe play, a child might pretend that, I don't know, that a block of wood is a telephone, for instance, and that is showing that they are thinking symbolically about objects. They're using one thing to represent another. And so you see that make-believe play. They pretend something is a phone. They pretend, I don't know, that they pretend that they put on a uniform and pretend that they're a doctor, or they pretend they're a policeman or fireman, and because they have a special hat or something, and and they build blocks, that represent castles to them, and toy cars represent real cars in their playtime, and so these are all symbols of things that they have concepts for, schemas that they have concepts, they're using these symbols in their mind, which shows that they're more advanced. I mean, they can think about things that aren't right there in front of them, but they have no logic. As it says here, they reason based on intuition and superficial appearances rather than logic. Um, and Piaget demonstrated in many types of tests the lack of logic in this age category. Um, two two key terms that I'll talk about is I'm going to start with the second one, egocentrism, and this represents seeing everything from their own perspective. So children in this stage are egocentric. They see everything from their own viewpoint or perspective. They have an inability to use other people's perspectives or to think about things from their perspective. I'll give you 3 quick examples. One one of them that apparently happened with Piaget when he was interviewing and talking with children in this age was there was a girl, I don't know how old, but somewhere in this age category, and she had a sister, and it was, so he asked her, well, do you have a sister? And she said, yeah, of course I have a sister, and and then he asked her, does your sister have a sister? And she said, oh, no, she doesn't have a sister. And so she couldn't take the perspective of the sister to realize that she would be her sister's sister. I mean, there's two girls. Like she has a sister, but her sister doesn't. And this showed egocentrism, that she was only seeing things from her viewpoint. She couldn't imagine, things from her sister's viewpoint. Um, One way that egocentrism shows up is the way children hide at this age. It's hilarious if you haven't been around preschoolers much, but um, they they believe if they can't see you, then you can't see them. So they will like be sitting in the middle of a room and just put a blanket over their head or something. Like and part of their body will be exposed and whatnot. But they'll just cover their head, and they believe that they're hiding because they can't see you. And so, there's this lump of a child with a blanket over their head. And anyways, or they go up to against a tree. Have you ever seen a young child? They go up against a tree and put their head against the tree and kind of their hands up against their eyes to shield their eyes. But they they're kind of facing the tree and just cover their eyes beside their head, and now they can't see you, and so they believe that they're hidden. Um, and so once again, they're using their own perspective. If I can't see you, then you can't see me. Uh, a third example is if you watch a young child on the phone, a preschooler, and they might be maybe they're talking to grandmother, and it's like, hey grandma, um, I got a great new toy for Christmas, and they'll say like, look at it, or here it is, and they'll hold it up in front of their own eyes, and they're talking on the phone with grandma who's in another house somewhere, and they hold it up, or I got a new hat for Christmas, and they just hold it up where they can see it, believing that grandma's now seeing it because they can. Okay, that is egocentrism. Centration refers to uh, paying attention to only one aspect or dimension of a problem or situation. Um, One aspect or dimension of a problem or situation, and they don't have the cognition at this point to think about more than one dimension or aspect of a problem or situation. So I'm going to give you a few examples, and the first one is, suppose you give a child a grain cracker, and you give their older sibling two graham crackers. So they're both sitting at the table. You put one in front of the preschooler, and you put two in front of the older child. And if you ask the preschooler, is this fair? The preschooler is going to know, like, no, like he's got two, I've got one. And so they're paying attention to the number. Oh, he's got two, and I've only got one. So all you have to do is go and break their graham cracker in half, and just spread out the two halves a little bit, and then ask them, now is it fair? And they'll look and go, yeah, it is. And if you ask them why, it'll be, he's got two and I've got two. And so it, once again, it's a lack of what we think of as logic of him. And in this case, I was talking about centration, they're centrating on number. So they're thinking about number. They're not thinking about how big or small the pieces are. They just, if he's got two and I've got two. And this works, by the way. You can do this if you ever have a preschooler complaining about that they don't have enough food compared to somebody else, or something like, he's got two hot dogs, I've got one. Just cut their hot dog in half, and then they've got two, and they'll be perfectly happy. Um, so you have to figure out what they're centrating on, and just make it equal. So if they're centrating on number, you just make it equal. Okay. Let me go to this slide here. And I'm not real happy with this picture, but I thought I'd leave it. It's of your book. I'm gonna blow it up a little. Because they're not showing the traditional tests that are used here. But so let me explain to you. So I'm gonna start with the third picture. So you gotta follow along, and you can revise your notes or whatever. I know they're using these pictures for a different purpose, but so this was a Piaget task that he used to test young children. And so you start with 2 glasses with liquid in them, and 2 glasses are the same, and you make sure the same amount of liquid, and you ask the child, like in number 3 here, like, is there the same amount in both? And they will look, and they'll kind of look closely, and they'll say yes. They are the same. And then what you do is you take one of these glasses, and I'm just going to move up, and you do the opposite what they're showing here. You pour the glass, the liquid into a different size glass. So just imagine reversing this. So I take the small glass, I pour it into this tall, thin glass. So we get to this picture up top here. And then you say, well, is there the same amount of liquid in both the glasses now? Or are they different? And every young child is going to point at the taller one and say that there's more in that one. And once again, you make sure you're doing this right, you're not hiding anything, you do it right in front of them. They saw that it came from 2 equal glasses. You take one of them, pour it into a tall, thin glass, and then if the liquid goes up higher, they'll say that one has more. They are centrating on the height in this case of the liquid. They're ignoring whether it's a wide glass or a thin glass. They're just centrating on height, and so they're using one aspect to compare them. This one goes higher, so it must have more. This task, by the way, that I just described is known as conservation of volume. That and this child, a young child in this pre-operational stage will fail it. Like, they won't understand that the amount of liquid can't change just because you put it in a different container. One more, and once again, I'm going to have to ask you to use your imagination a little bit. In this one, which is called conservation of number, you actually start with 2 rows of usually they use coins, but you can use marbles, and you actually start with them lined up. So imagine this second row here was squished together like this first one, where they're opposite from one another. So I would have 6 in each row, and they would be opposite each other, so kind of all matched up. And you ask them, are they the same number in each row? And a lot of kids will count, but you can visually just see that there's the same number. So, but a lot of them will count anyways, and they'll actually count both rows and say, yeah, there is the same number. And then once again, while they're watching, you spread out one of the rows, like so, arriving at this picture here, whether it's coins or marbles or whatever it is. You just spread them out, just move them a little bit aside like this. So you make it like this, and then you ask them, is there the same number in each now? So like they can see that you didn't add or take any away. But once again, they have no logic. Their logic, what the kind of logic they have is all based on appearance of things. So they look, and they always say that this bottom row has more. And you ask them why, and they say because it's longer, or they say it's more spread out. And so they're centrating on the length of the row. So whichever one you spread out to make it look longer, they'll say that one has more. And so this is once again known as conservation of number. And these are tests that Piaget came up to test children's logical kinds of abilities. And he found that at this age, children fail these kinds of tests. I have included a video that you can watch after this one. It actually goes through the 3 tests I just talked about. It shows you the graham cracker test. It shows you the conservation of liquid, and also shows you conservation of number. So it's only a couple minutes. Make sure you take a look at that. Now, as we move to the 3rd stage, children will pass all of these tests. They will pass conservation of volume using the liquid, and conservation of number. There's also conservation of mass is another test, and I think there's another one as well. I can't remember what it's called, but this is one of the major changes as we get to the concrete operational stage, which is from 7 to 12 years of age. Okay. Let me start by just reading what's here. This is a 3rd stage. During this stage, children begin to think about and understand logical operations. and they are no longer fooled by appearances. By the way, this, if we look back to the title, pre-operational means that they cannot yet perform logical operations, which are just kind of using, doing logic mentally. It's like a logical operation would be like adding numbers together in your head, or just, any kind of logic you do in your head. So now they can think about and understand logical operations, and they're no longer fooled by appearances. They've now grasped the law of conservation, and conservation means it that they know that the amount of something doesn't change just because the appearance does. So going back, they know that the amount of liquid can't change just because you poured it in different glass. The amount of marbles can't change just because you move them apart. And the amount of the graham crackers doesn't change just because you broke one in half. That is the law of conservation. That just because you change the way something looks, and you don't add it or take anything away, it's the same amount. And I'll just mention one of the other tests they do is like with Play-Doh. You start with two balls of Play-Doh that look the same, and children will say that they both have the same amount. And then you just need to flatten one of them, or you roll it into like a long snake, and then you ask them again, and they'll pick one or the other as having more Play-Doh in it, even though nothing was added or taken away. So the pre-operational kids would pick one or the other. So at this concrete stage, they would say, "Of course it is the same," and they'll even think you're silly for asking. Like, of course it's the same amount. Are you kidding? And so they've gained the ability now to understand some basic logic, but they can only perform logical mental operations for actual physical events or concrete objects, concrete objects, which is why it's called concrete operational stage. They don't have the ability yet to use their minds logically on hypothetical or abstract concepts. So a child at this stage would not be able to do algebra well, because algebra is very abstract. It's x's and y's, and they don't represent, what's the x mean? What's the y? Like it's a very abstract kind of math. And this is why we wait until adolescence to teach algebra. So they can do logic if they can see, like if you're talking about objects that are in front of them, or you're showing them pictures, or it's an actual thing that they're watching, an event that they're watching, they can use logic. But if you have them, like, you describe some made up situation, and they won't be able to perform the same kind of logic on it. I'll give you one quick example. It's called the transitive law. If A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, then A must be bigger than C. Anyways, if you do this during this 7 to 12-year-old concrete operational stage, and you have dolls, and I say, look, this one's Alice, and this second doll's Betty, and I stand up next to each other. Look, Alice is taller than Betty. Then I move Alice away, and I leave Betty there, and I say, oh, here's Carla. And I bring in a third doll. I go, look, Betty is taller than Carla. And then I say, hey, and I've already moved Alice away. So they can't actually like pick them up and compare them. I say, do you think Alice, who's taller, Alice or Carla? So they will solve this at this stage because you use dolls, or if you had pictures, and like, A is bigger than B. Alice is bigger than Betty and taller than Betty. Look, Betty's bigger than Carla. They would do it. But if I just do it mentally without dolls or pictures, and I say, hey, I've got three friends. One friend, Alice, is taller than my other friend, Betty. And you know what? And then I compare Betty to Carla, and Betty was taller than Carla. And I say, who do you think's taller, Alice or Carla? They fail to solve it, or at least most of them, because it's now moved into the hypothetical range. It's too much for them to juggle around and keep straight in their minds to solve it. Okay, this will happen though in the fourth stage, when they reach formal operational stage from 12 years to adult. The final stage. During the stage, people can think abstractly, and they can formulate and test hypotheses through logic. They can start, he described now they start acting like kind of like researchers or scientists. They hypothesize about how things work, and they can figure out how to test it. And so they can now think about hypotheticals and abstract ideas such as algebra, or this is when they'll start thinking about or questioning God. Maybe if let's say they were brought up with a belief in or whoever God or some other deity, deity, okay, whatever. Uh, anyways, or they might start questioning, if their parents are the best parents in the world, like they just believed it growing up, like this, because this is what happens to adolescence as you move into this new kind of thinking where you can imagine things being different. Then it opens up a whole new areas to think about. You start questioning things you just accepted as children, and because now you have the ability to think about them. So they can understand hypothetical reasoning beyond the here and now, and they can understand logical concepts and abstract ideas. And once again, they can form hypotheses and test them using logic. So this is the final stage. And according to Piaget, once you reach formal operational stage, this is the stage you're going to be at, for the rest of your life. There is, there are other researchers that have speculated there might be another stage after, but according to Piaget, this is the final stage. And not everyone makes it here, by the way. There are plenty of people in society that would still be at the concrete operational stage. If you ever meet somebody that doesn't like um, abstract ideas or they don't like hypothetical things, like my wife's a little bit like that. She would never watch science fiction, for example. Like she hates it. Like, and it's partially because she doesn't like things that aren't real. She doesn't want to use her mind to think about some space travel thing or whatever that doesn't exist. And it's she prefers concrete ideas. So anyway, let's move on now. The final word about Piaget's theory here. There's been a lot of newer research showing that he underestimated the ages at which certain skills develop. I mentioned earlier that more current research shows that object permanence probably develops more around the age of 4 months rather than 8 to 12 months like he thought. And this happened with a number of parts of his theory that he didn't have the ages quite right. And people also questioned whether or not there's really stages that you kind of jump from, like a tadpole to a frog, like you completely change your thinking. So that Piaget's idea was that you would completely change your thinking as you move from one stage to another. So you would no longer think the way you used to about anything. And a lot of evidence shows that's not quite right. We do still believe in the 4 stages, and because there's a lot of evidence that's backed it up that our thinking does change over time as we age. But now they think of it as it says here as trends. Uh, Modern interpretations view his theory in terms of trends, not rigid stages, and that children shift gradually in their thinking over a wide range of ages rather than what Piaget previously thought and others. And they can demonstrate thinking skills in more than one stage at a time. So you don't just shift from one stage to the other and leave the last one behind. And you can see this diagram here. Like if you look at a 6.5-year-old, they might be doing some concrete operational thinking about certain things. Like maybe they solved the conservation of number problem with the marbles, but they don't quite solve the conservation of volume one with the liquid yet. And so part of the thinking is in that green bar, and part is still in the pink bar in the pre-operational stage. And this is what current evidence seems to suggest, that we don't just move from one to the other. We some skills you might move ahead faster, and other skills you're still in the previous stage. And anyways, and So this is, once again, a more current idea. Okay, two more ideas to cover in just one slide each. There's an alternate perspective that came from Lev Vygotsky, and he said that humans are unique because they use symbols and psychological tools to create culture. And what he means by symbols and psychological tools are things like speech and writing and maps and art. These are all like human symbols or psychological tools that we use, and they create our culture. And in turn, culture dictates what people need to learn and the sorts of skills they need to develop. And so his idea, and his theory, by the way, was called the socio-cultural theory of cognitive development, because it's about society and culture and how it affects our thinking. So his basic idea is that our mental functions are shaped by our social and cultural context that we develop in. So in one culture, if you're growing up in one culture, your culture may value science and math, like, and writing skills like our culture does. And you would learn these things growing up. They would be valuable. They're valuable, and so they'd be passed on by your educators and parents, or members of society. And this is what we feel like it's important that every child learns basic math and science and writing skills in English, or whatever language you have to, whatever country you're in. But in another culture, they're not teaching those things necessarily. Like, children might be learning how to hunt and fish, as they're developing, because maybe in a more tribal culture, that is what their culture is about, and what's important in their culture. So they would think that teaching mathematics is a waste of time, or uh, and so this is what Vygotsky pointed out, that your thinking will develop according to what's important to your culture and your society. And it will change from one culture to another. And this was in contrast to Piaget. Piaget thought his theory would apply to every, children all around the world in every culture. Vygotsky thought that thinking would develop differently in each culture. Finally, knowledgeable individuals provide scaffolding to guide younger generations' socialization into the culture. Scaffolding just refers to basic support and guidance. Um, and I don't want to get into too much, but it's kind of like you teach a child things step by step, and you originally give them a ton of support when they first learning a skill, but as they start to master it, you don't give them as much. You might just give them hints, or you might, as they get better and better at a skill, then um, and that's why it's called scaffold. It's like a whole bunch of layers. Like, originally you give all the layers of support, then you start withdrawing them. Okay, they don't need this part of my help anymore. They don't need this part. So you keep expecting the child to do more on their own, and you give them less assistance over time. And that's basically what scaffolding is. But it's a type of basic support and guidance. And finally, this is our last slide. Theory of mind is kind of an interesting topic. Most people aren't really familiar with this term. It's the capacity to understand that other people have minds and intentions that are different from our own. And you may say, well, that's obvious, but it's not to really young children. Once again, uh, there's a time when we were very young that we think what's in our own head is in everyone's head. Um, and this kind of exists for the first few years of life. And so a young child at the age of 2 or 3, for instance, they wouldn't think of even lying about something. Let's say they break a lamp in the living room, and the mother comes in, like, they wouldn't blame it on the dog or anything like that, because there would be no use. Like, they know that they broke the lamp. They just assume the mother knows. So in this, so you may see that this kind of connects to the idea of egocentrism, like you know, what is kind of like everything from their perspective, but it's a little bit different. It's like everything in their mind is the same as in everyone else's mind. And this includes desires, intentions, beliefs, mental states, you know. And give you a quick example, let's say a young child at 2 or 3, like they know that chocolate is their favorite ice cream. They know that it's the best ice cream. They would be they would have trouble understanding why some other child's ordering strawberry ice cream. They wouldn't, like we would just know, well, different people like different things, but they wouldn't understand that. They would think, why is that child not ordering the best ice cream? Like, and because if they know chocolate's the best, they believe it's the same for everyone. Um, as infants and children acquire theory of mind, they develop the ability to think in increasingly sophisticated ways. So I'm going to list a few of them. Um, so I already mentioned that once they understand theory of mind, this is when they might start lying. So they gain the ability to lie or to fib, and because it's a realization that other people don't know. Like when they break the lamp in the living room and the mother's in a different room or out of the house, that she doesn't necessarily know that it was them. So maybe they blame it on the dog, or they fib. Like they'll once the child gains this ability, they'll start making things up. Like and just to like fool with people and stuff, and telling like little fibs, and it's enjoyable to them. But also they didn't have the ability before. They might hide something on someone else. Like their sister leaves a room, and so they take the sister's toy that she was playing with, and they hide it behind the bookshelf or something, just to see, her reaction when they come back. They wouldn't have thought of this before because there would have been no use in hiding something because they would know where it is. But now they realize, oh, my sister isn't in the room. She won't know where it is. Um, they will start to understand uh, when to ask a parent for for a treat or some kind of favor that they want them. They'll start figuring out that they're more likely to get it. For instance, if the parent's in a good mood, if the parent's really happy and in a good mood, oh, that's the time to ask for a treat, or to stay up later or something like this. They once again they wouldn't have thought of this before. Now they understand that the it's important what's in the parent's mind. If that the parent, if the parent's happy or the parent's sad, like that's in their head, and it affects. It can affect whether they give you a treat or not. I'll give you one more example. A child might once they have theory of mind, they might offer to hug someone who is upset or somebody that's in pain. And once again, they wouldn't have thought of it at a younger age before theory of mind they wouldn't have because if they weren't upset or in pain, then they wouldn't understand that another child is. Another child feels differently. And by the way, this is why like a preschooler might go and take a toy from another kid, and let's say the other kid starts crying, like, and the preschooler just walks away with the toy, like they're not a complete jerk. I want to tell you this now, like they they may be at the age, if they're really young still, 2 or 3 years of age, like they may be at the age where they just don't understand that their action causes. I mean, like they wanted the toy, so they took it to play with it, and the other kid starts crying, but they're not. They don't feel sad, so they would have trouble making sense of it, and they wouldn't connect that it was their action that caused it. Uh, Anyways, let's go on, and we will move on to learning objective 4 in the next video.